Grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. The text is out of the Gospel which I read earlier in the 24th chapter of Luke. Today we're still dealing with the reality of Jesus' resurrection. On Easter evening, the disciples were in hiding, rehashing the happenings of the day. No doubt they talked about the empty tomb, the missing soldier guard, talked about the presence of the angels in the tomb, the brief conference that Mary Magdalene had with Jesus, and the observations of the women who viewed the empty tomb, the details that Peter and John supplied after their race to the cemetery. And finally, the latest report from the two disciples who had walked to Emmaus with a stranger, not suspecting that he was the risen Lord. Then out of nowhere, Jesus appears in their presence, like a ghost would. Ghosts were a favorite topic in the first century. Some critical commentators, not necessarily Christian converts, have roused up a number of theories about Jesus' appearance in this occasion. Many of them sound possible of how Jesus appeared so quickly. One said, well, he climbed up a ladder and he entered through a window. Or he descended the stairway from the roof. Or he entered the house before all the doors were locked. Or he slipped in when the housekeeper opened the door for the two disciples when they returned from Emmaus. Martin Luther offers a much more reasonable solution to this mystery. By this coming through locked doors is shown that since his resurrection in this kingdom on earth, he is no longer bound to bodily, visible, tangible, mundane substance, time, place, space, and the like, but wants to be known and believed as ruling by his power everywhere present, having the will to be with us and help us in all places, at all times, when and where we need it, unfettered and unhindered by the world and all its might. The words of Martin Luther. Jesus was appalled that the disciples were so doubtful and frightened when he stood in their midst. He saw that his first order of business was to convince them that he was their Lord and Master who was crucified on Friday and rose from the dead. His object here was to convince them that his body had really come to life. To follow his words with action, he showed them the prints of the nails in his hands and the prints of the nails in his feet, and he invited them to touch them. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not not have flesh and bones as you see that I have, Jesus said. Were they convinced? Not yet. Because Luke comments, while in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering. So Jesus indirectly tries another approach. When the disciples were terrible hosts, there's no evidence that they offered Jesus anything to eat or drink when he came in, when he arrived. Can you imagine that these disciples forgot their manners for entertaining guests, and the greatest guest of all guests? There's no hint that Jesus purposely embarrassed his host when he asked, "Have you anything here to eat?" They quickly responded by handing him a piece of broiled fish, maybe a piece that was left over from the meal that they had just finished. He may not have been hungry. The Lord's intention was apparently an attempt to convince his disciples that though he was totally free to appear and disappear instantly in his resurrected body, he was still human enough to need and to consume food. Reading between the lines, Jesus must have been somewhat upset that his disciples had forgotten what he had told them through the years about the prophets in his teachings. So to summarize, Jesus claims that the entire Old Testament was developed with him in mind. Jesus views the Old Testament as a unit with its contents centering on him. None of the scriptural books would have existed without him, and none could be properly understood without him. And then Jesus delved into the scriptures at some length, and this time around he had their whole minds and their hearts' attention with more certain understanding. This means that the disciples now realize that the Old Testament stated prophetically that happenings that they had witnessed, and that they were now witnessing. Prophecy becomes more clear when the actual fulfillment can be placed right beside it. The disciples' session with the risen Lord was really too good to be true. And on the other hand, it was too good not to be true. When Jesus began his ministry, he gave personal invitations to 12 men with a stated purpose. Matthew quotes him as saying, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." After 3 years of root training, he elevates their level of responsibility now to witnessing heralds of the good news. Jesus is quite specific in his directions in today's gospel. Those who have witnessed the risen Christ are to proclaim repentance and forgiveness of sin in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. Now, why Jerusalem? Jerusalem was the very heart of the Jewish nation. If the testimonials of these herald witnesses could convert Jews in the headquarters center of Judaism, their chances of conversions in outlying areas would be greatly enhanced. The one thing that Luke is trying to tell us in today's gospel, above all else, is that the resurrected Jesus is not some wispy spirit, not some ghostly apparition. In his flesh and bone, the risen Christ invites his followers to touch his hands and his feet. Before their very eyes, he chews and he swallows the piece of fish. Just the sort of detail an observant doctor like Luke would notice. Luke takes great pains to demonstrate that the resurrection is real. It's not virtual. Many of us in our younger generation have been tagged as digital natives, as opposed to digital immigrants, or those of us who didn't grow up with a smartphone in our hand. A question that comes easily to digital natives as applied to all sorts of experiences is this: is it virtual or is it real? The experience of the disciples was not virtual. The witness of Luke is clear. It was real. What could bring on such an incredible testimony? Only the real experience of touching Jesus' hands and feet, or feeling flesh and bone. In this dark world of ours, the touch that matters most is the touch of the risen Lord. He invites you and me this day to reach out and to touch him, to experience his love, to see that he is no mere illusion, but he is a living presence in our midst. Amen. Peace of God that passes all understanding, keep your heart and your mind